Chapter 1. The Silent House. A sprawling Victorian mansion, its once proud facade now cracked and weathered, stood sentinel over a desolate expanse of New England countryside. Winter's icy grip had transformed the landscape into a monochromatic canvas of white. The house, too, was cloaked in snow, its darkened windows mirroring the desolate expanse. Inside, a chilling silence reigned, broken only by the mournful creak of settling timbers and the distant howl of wind. Dust motes danced lazily in the shafts of meager sunlight that pierced the gloom, casting elongated shadows that seemed to writhe and contort. The air was thick with the scent of decay, a mingling of old wood and forgotten time. A grand staircase, its velvet carpet worn and threadbare, swept upward, vanishing into the shadowy upper floors. Each step echoed with a hollow thud, a sound that seemed to amplify the house's eerie solitude. Chapter 2. A Glimpse of Darkness. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the old house in deepening shadows, an unseen presence seemed to stir from its slumber. A cold draft, carrying with it the faintest whisper of decay, swept through the silent corridors. The house, once a bastion of warmth and life, had transformed into a mausoleum of silence and dread. Shadows, elongated and grotesque, danced and writhed in the flickering candlelight, their sinister shapes contorting into monstrous forms. The grandfather clock, its aged mechanism creaking with each passing moment, seemed to tick with a morbid cadence, a relentless countdown to something sinister. Its deep, resonant chimes echoed through the empty rooms, amplifying the house's eerie solitude. The floorboards groaned and protested under an unseen weight, as if the house itself were alive and in pain. A chill, unlike the normal winter cold, crept into the bones, a sensation of being watched from the impenetrable darkness. The air thickened with anticipation, a palpable sense of dread hanging heavy in the atmosphere. From the attic, a spectral glow emanated, casting eerie patterns on the hallway walls. It was an invitation, a beckoning to the unknown, a promise of horrors yet to be unveiled. The glow pulsed and wavered, as if a malevolent force were struggling to break free. A sense of urgency gnawed at the mind, a compulsion to investigate the source of the otherworldly light. The house seemed to close in, its walls pressing inward, creating a claustrophobic atmosphere. The once familiar surroundings had morphed into a labyrinth of fear. Every creak, every groan, every whisper of wind was magnified, transformed into a cacophony of terror. The silence, once comforting, now seemed to scream with menace. A faint scratching sound echoed from the depths of the house, a sound that sent shivers down the spine. It was as if something was clawing its way through the walls, desperate to be free. A low growl, distant yet menacing, rumbled through the house, a primal sound that awakened the most ancient fears. The house was no longer merely a structure. It had become a living entity, malevolent and hungry. Its secrets, dark and profound, were slowly being revealed, one chilling revelation at a time. Chapter 3. The Watchful Eyes. A sense of being observed permeated the house, a constant, gnawing unease. Shadows seemed to shift and coalesce, taking on human shapes that flickered and disappeared. The air grew colder, a chilling draft that seeped into the marrow of the bones. The house itself seemed to close in, its walls pressing inward, creating a suffocating embrace. Every creak and groan was magnified, transformed into a sinister symphony of dread. The once comforting silence had become a cacophony of terror, a constant reminder of the unseen presence lurking within the shadows. The grandfather clock ticked with an ominous rhythm, each stroke a heartbeat in the house's malevolent pulse. As night deepened, the spectral glow from the attic intensified, casting grotesque shadows on the hallway walls. They seemed to writhe and contort, taking on the appearance of eyes, watching, waiting. A cold sweat broke out as the realization dawned that they were not mere illusions, but manifestations of a sinister intelligence. The house was alive with unseen movements, the soft scuffle of unseen feet, the faintest whisper of breath. The feeling of being watched intensified, a pressure building behind the eyes, a sense of impending doom. The air thickened with the scent of decay, a mingling of old wood and something far more sinister. A chilling realization crept into consciousness. The house was not merely haunted. It was a predator, and its prey was anyone who dared to enter its domain. The walls seemed to close in, the darkness pressing against the mind, a suffocating blanket of terror. Panic began to claw at the edges of sanity, a desperate struggle to maintain control. The house was a labyrinth of fear, a place where shadows held secrets and the past bled into the present. A cold dread settled in the pit of the stomach, a premonition of horrors yet to come. The watchful eyes in the darkness seemed to promise a fate far worse than death. Chapter 4. Echoes in the Night. Night descended upon the house, a heavy, oppressive blanket of darkness. The wind howled outside, its mournful wail echoing through the empty rooms. Shadows danced and writhed, taking on grotesque forms that seemed to shift and change with each flicker of the candlelight. The house creaked and groaned, its timbers protesting against the relentless assault of the night. A cold, insidious dread seeped into the soul, a constant companion in the growing darkness. The air was thick with the scent of decay, a mingling of old wood and something far more sinister. The grandfather clock ticked with an ominous rhythm, its deep, resonant chimes echoing through the silent house. Each stroke of the pendulum seemed to bring the house closer to a cataclysmic climax. Faint whispers carried on the wind, fragments of conversations lost to time. Children's laughter, tinged with an eerie melancholy, echoed through the halls. A woman's mournful wail pierced the night, a sound that chilled the blood. These echoes of the past were more than just sounds. They were spectral remnants of lives lived and lost within these walls. The house was a living entity, its dark secrets slowly unraveling. The watchful eyes in the shadows seemed to intensify, their presence more palpable than ever before. A cold sweat broke out as the realization dawned that something evil was stirring, something ancient and hungry. The house was a prison, and the captive was trapped within its suffocating embrace. A sense of urgency gnawed at the mind, a desperate need to escape the growing darkness. But escape seemed impossible. The house was a labyrinth, its corridors twisting and turning, leading nowhere. The only way out was through, and that path was shrouded in a terrifying unknown. With each passing moment, the fear grew, a consuming force that threatened to overwhelm. The house was a malevolent entity, feeding on the terror of its captive. And as the night wore on, the hunger of the house seemed to grow stronger. Chapter 5. The Uninvited Guest. A new presence had infiltrated the house, a cold, sinister force that slithered through the shadows. Its arrival was marked by a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a deepening of the darkness, a chilling intensification of the dread. The house seemed to respond to this new entity, its creaks and groans taking on a more sinister tone. The air grew heavy with anticipation, a palpable sense of something terrible about to unfold. The watchful eyes in the shadows seemed to intensify, their gaze more focused, more predatory. A cold sweat broke out as the realization dawned that the house was not alone in its hunger for fear. The uninvited guest made its presence known in subtle ways. Objects moved of their own accord, doors creaked open without human intervention. Shadows took on more defined shapes, grotesque and menacing. A low, guttural growl echoed through the house, a sound that sent shivers down the spine. The grandfather clock seemed to accelerate its ticking, its chimes more insistent, more urgent. The house was alive with a malevolent energy, a force that fed on terror and despair. The captive was a mere pawn in a sinister game, a plaything for dark forces. Panic began to claw at the edges of sanity. The house was a labyrinth of fear, and there was no escape. The uninvited guest was closing in, its presence growing stronger with each passing moment. The air grew colder, a chilling draft that seeped into the soul. The house was a tomb waiting to be filled. The captive was the chosen sacrifice, a life to be extinguished in a ritual of darkness. The end was near, and with it, a descent into a madness beyond comprehension. Chapter 6: Shadows in the Corner. The house was a labyrinth of fear, its corridors twisting and turning, leading nowhere. The uninvited guest was closing in, its presence growing stronger with each passing moment. The air grew colder, a chilling draft that seeped into the soul. The house was a tomb waiting to be filled. The captive was the chosen sacrifice, a life to be extinguished in a ritual of darkness. The end was near, and with it, a descent into a madness beyond comprehension. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to writhe and contort, taking on grotesque forms. They moved, slithered, and crept, their sinister shapes growing larger and more menacing with each passing moment. The air grew thick with anticipation, a palpable sense of something terrible about to unfold. The watchful eyes in the shadows seemed to intensify, their gaze more focused, more predatory. A cold sweat broke out as the realization dawned that the house was not alone in its hunger for fear. The uninvited guest made its presence known in subtle ways. Objects moved of their own accord, doors creaked open without human intervention. Shadows took on more defined shapes, grotesque and menacing. A low, guttural growl echoed through the house, a sound that sent shivers down the spine. The grandfather clock seemed to accelerate its ticking, its chimes more insistent, more urgent. The house was alive with a malevolent energy, a force that fed on terror and despair. The captive was a mere pawn in a sinister game, a plaything for dark forces. Panic began to claw at the edges of sanity. The house was a labyrinth of fear, and there was no escape. The uninvited guest was closing in, its presence growing stronger with each passing moment. The air grew colder, a chilling draft that seeped into the soul. The house was a tomb waiting to be filled. The captive was the chosen sacrifice, a life to be extinguished in a ritual of darkness. The end was near, and with it, a descent into a madness beyond comprehension. Chapter 7: The Creeping Cold. A relentless cold had descended upon the house, a chilling permeation that seeped into the bones. It was more than a physical sensation. It was a malevolent force, a creeping darkness that consumed from within. The air was thick with the scent of decay, a mingling of old wood and something far more sinister. The house seemed to be exhaling its own icy breath, a chilling counterpoint to the warmth of the human body. The shadows in the corners had deepened, their forms more grotesque, more menacing. They seemed to pulse with a sinister life, their movements erratic and unpredictable. The watchful eyes in the darkness had intensified, their gaze burning holes into the soul. A sense of impending doom hung heavy in the air, a palpable dread that was almost suffocating. The grandfather clock ticked with an ominous rhythm, its chimes echoing through the silent house. Each stroke of the pendulum seemed to bring the house closer to a cataclysmic climax. The floorboards groaned and protested, as if the house itself were in agony. A low, guttural growl echoed through the walls, a primal sound that awakened the most ancient fears. The house was a tomb, its icy embrace growing tighter with each passing moment. The captive was a mere speck in a vast expanse of darkness, a life dwindling in the face of an overwhelming force. The uninvited guest was drawing closer, its presence more palpable than ever before. A cold sweat broke out as the realization dawned that there was no escape, no refuge from the encroaching cold. The mind began to slow, the senses dulled by the relentless chill. The body ached with a cold that penetrated to the very core. The world narrowed to a single point of focus, the fight for survival. But survival seemed an impossible dream, a futile struggle against an invincible enemy. The house was a living entity, a malevolent force that sought to extinguish all warmth, all life. The captive was a dying ember, a flicker of consciousness in a world consumed by ice. The end was near, and with it, a descent into a frozen oblivion. Chapter 8. A sense of being watched. The sensation of being watched had evolved from a nagging suspicion into a palpable reality. The eyes in the darkness were no longer mere figments of a terrified imagination. They were tangible entities, observing every move, anticipating every action. The house seemed to be alive with their presence, a sinister intelligence that permeated every corner. The shadows had taken on a life of their own, shifting and morphing into grotesque caricatures of humanity. They moved with a purpose, a sinister intent that chilled the blood. The air was thick with anticipation, a palpable sense of something terrible about to unfold. The grandfather clock ticked with a relentless rhythm, its chimes echoing through the silent house, a constant reminder of the passage of time and the impending doom. A cold draft swept through the room, carrying with it the faintest whisper of decay. The temperature dropped dramatically, a chilling sensation that seeped into the marrow of the bones. The house seemed to be exhaling its own icy breath, a malevolent force that sought to extinguish all warmth, all life. The captive was a mere speck in a vast expanse of darkness, a life dwindling in the face of an overwhelming force. The uninvited guest was drawing closer, its presence a palpable weight in the suffocating atmosphere. The mind raced, searching for a way to escape, a way to break free from the clutches of terror. But there was no escape, no refuge from the relentless pursuit of the unseen hunters. The house was a labyrinth of fear, a place where shadows held secrets and the past bled into the present. A cold dread settled in the pit of the stomach, a premonition of horrors yet to come. The watchful eyes in the darkness seemed to promise a fate far worse than death. The captive was alone, utterly and completely alone. The only sound was the relentless ticking of the grandfather clock, a morbid metronome counting down the final moments. The world was a blur of darkness and fear, a place where sanity was a fragile illusion. The end was near, and with it, a descent into a madness beyond comprehension. Chapter 9. The Forbidden Room. A door, hidden behind a tapestry of faded crimson, beckoned with a sinister allure. Its surface was cold to the touch, as if imbued with the same chilling essence that permeated the house. A sense of dread accompanied the realization that this was the Forbidden Room, a place of unspeakable horrors. With trembling hands, the door creaked open, revealing a darkness so profound it seemed to swallow light. The room was a void, a chasm of nothingness. The air was thick with the scent of decay, intensified to a nauseating level. A faint whisper, like the rustling of dry leaves, carried on the wind, a chilling prelude to the unknown. Shadows danced and writhed on the walls, taking on grotesque forms that shifted and changed with each flicker of imagination. The floor was cold and damp, as if the room itself were weeping. A sense of being watched intensified, a pressure building behind the eyes. The air grew colder, a chilling draft that seeped into the soul. The heart pounded in the chest, a frantic drumbeat against the encroaching darkness. Every creak, every groan of the house seemed amplified in this forbidden space, a cacophony of terror that assaulted the senses. The room was alive with a malevolent energy, a presence that was both tangible and ethereal. It was a place where the lines between the living and the dead blurred, where the boundaries of sanity were tested to their limits. A cold sweat broke out as the realization dawned that this was the heart of darkness, the epicenter of the house's evil. The door slammed shut behind, isolating the captive in this tomb of terror. There was no escape, no retreat, only the endless expanse of darkness and the growing realization that the worst was yet to come. The forbidden room was a gateway to hell, and the captive was about to step through the threshold. Chapter 10. The Haunting Melody. A haunting melody, ethereal and otherworldly, filled the forbidden room. It was a mournful dirge, a lament for lost souls. The notes seemed to seep into the bones, a chilling vibration that resonated deep within. The melody was both beautiful and terrifying, a siren song that lured and repelled in equal measure. Shadows danced to the haunting tune, their movements synchronized with the rise and fall of the music. The air grew colder, a chilling draft that carried the melody through the room, a mournful echo of despair. The house seemed to resonate with the song, its creaks and groans harmonizing with the ethereal tune. A sense of overwhelming sadness washed over the captive, a deep-seated melancholy that was both familiar and alien. Tears streamed down the face, silent sobs echoing the mournful melody. The heart ached with a pain that transcended physical suffering, a longing for something lost, something irretrievable. The melody grew louder, more insistent, filling the room with its haunting beauty. It was a call, a summons to an unknown destination. A sense of surrender crept into the mind, a willing acceptance of the inevitable. The captive was drawn to the music, a moth to a flame, powerless to resist its intoxicating allure. The room seemed to transform, the walls receding into a swirling vortex of color and light. The melody reached a crescendo, a blinding white light filling the room. And then, silence. The only sound was the rapid beating of the heart, a desperate attempt to regain control. But it was too late. The captive had been consumed by the music, lost in a world of shadows and despair. Chapter 11. A Descent into Madness. Reality fractured, shattered into a kaleidoscope of distorted images. The world was a surreal canvas, painted in hues of fear and despair. The lines between the conscious and the subconscious blurred, merging into a chaotic maelstrom. The mind, once a fortress of reason, was now a battleground, a chaotic arena where sanity fought for survival. Hallucinations crept into consciousness, grotesque manifestations of a tortured mind. Shadows took on human form, whispering promises of oblivion. The house seemed to morph and change, its familiar contours twisting and contorting into grotesque parodies. The air was thick with the scent of decay, a nauseating perfume of madness. Time lost its meaning, stretching and contracting at will. Days turned into nights, and nights into an endless twilight. The captive was a ghost in their own body, a hollow shell inhabited by a phantom of fear. The world was a labyrinth of shadows, a place where logic had no meaning. The body ached with a constant, gnawing pain, a physical manifestation of the mental torment. Sleep was a distant memory, replaced by a restless vigil filled with nightmares and hallucinations. The mind raced, searching for an escape, a way to break free from the prison of madness. But there was no escape, only a deeper descent into the abyss. The captive was alone, utterly and completely alone. The world was a void, a black expanse filled with the echoes of a shattered mind. The only sound was the whisper of madness, a constant companion in the desolate landscape of the soul. The end was near, and with it, a complete surrender to the darkness. Chapter 12. The Blood-Soaked History. fragments of a dark history began to emerge from the depths of the mind. A macabre tapestry woven from shadows and whispers. The house was no mere dwelling. It was a haunted vessel, carrying the weight of unspeakable atrocities. Visions of violence and suffering flashed before the eyes, haunting echoes of a past that refused to be buried. Children's laughter, once filled with joy, now carried an eerie undertone of despair. The house, once a place of warmth and family, had become a chamber of horrors. Shadows took on the shape of tormented souls, their eyes filled with a haunting sorrow. The air grew heavy with the scent of blood, a phantom odor that clung to the walls. The walls seemed to bleed, crimson stains seeping through the plaster. The floorboards creaked with a mournful rhythm, as if bearing the weight of countless tragedies. The house was a living entity, its bricks imbued with the essence of suffering. It was a place where the past was never truly dead, where echoes of horror lingered in the shadows. The grandfather clock ticked with a macabre cadence, each stroke a reminder of the relentless march of time. Yet, in this house, time stood still, frozen in a moment of eternal torment. The captive was an unwitting participant in a timeless tragedy, a ghost haunting the ghosts of the past. A sense of overwhelming guilt crept into the mind, a heavy burden to bear. The captive was a descendant of those who had inflicted the pain, a bloodline tainted by the sins of the forefathers. The house was a mirror, reflecting the darkness within. The end was near, and with it, a reckoning with the past. The captive was trapped in a cycle of violence and retribution, a prisoner of history. The house was not merely haunted. It was a living testament to the enduring power of evil. Chapter 13. The Child's Whisper. A child's laughter echoed through the house, a sound at once innocent and terrifying. It was a whisper carried on the wind, a haunting melody that pierced the darkness. The laughter grew louder, more insistent, filling the room with a sense of childlike joy. Yet, there was an undercurrent of despair, a melancholy that chilled the blood. A small, spectral figure appeared in the corner of the room, a child bathed in an ethereal glow. Its eyes were empty, void of emotion, yet filled with a haunting sadness. The child's laughter turned to sobs, a mournful wail that echoed through the house. The figure reached out, its tiny hand trembling as if to touch. The captive felt a surge of protectiveness, a desire to comfort the suffering child. But the child was a phantom, an apparition of sorrow. The touch was cold, icy, and filled with a despair that was almost tangible. The child's whisper, once filled with laughter, now carried a message of despair, a plea for salvation. The house seemed to mourn with the child, its creaks and groans harmonizing with the child's sorrow. The walls wept, silent tears streaming down their weathered surfaces. The grandfather clock ticked with a mournful rhythm, a constant reminder of the passage of time and the enduring nature of suffering. The child's form began to fade, dissolving into a mist of sorrow. The laughter turned to a whisper, a final goodbye before disappearing into the ether. The room was filled with a profound silence, a heavy weight of loss. The captive was alone again, but this time, the solitude was filled with a deep sense of empathy. The child's suffering had touched a raw nerve, awakening a compassion long buried beneath layers of fear. The house was no longer just a haunted dwelling. It was a tomb filled with the echoes of innocent lives lost. The weight of the past was heavy, but within that darkness, a flicker of hope ignited. Perhaps, in the midst of horror, there was a chance for redemption. Chapter 14. The Final Warning. A cold, insidious dread crept into the heart, a premonition of impending doom. The house seemed to vibrate with a sinister energy, a malevolent force building to a crescendo. The air grew thick with anticipation, a palpable sense of something terrible about to unfold. The shadows in the corners seemed to coalesce, forming a grotesque, menacing entity. The grandfather clock ticked with a frantic urgency, its chimes echoing through the house like a funeral dirge. The floorboards groaned and protested, as if the house itself were in agony. A low, guttural growl emanated from the depths, a primal sound that awakened the most ancient fears. The temperature dropped dramatically, a chilling cold that seeped into the soul. The house seemed to be exhaling its icy breath, a final, chilling embrace. The captive was alone, a solitary figure in a world consumed by darkness. A spectral glow emanated from the attic, a beacon of impending doom. The watchful eyes in the darkness intensified, their gaze fixed on the captive with a predatory hunger. The house was a cage, and the captive was the final prey. There was no escape, no refuge. The end was near, a cataclysmic event that would consume everything in its path. The mind raced, searching for a solution, a way to break free from the impending horror. But there was no answer, only a growing sense of despair. The house was a living entity, a malevolent force that sought to destroy. The captive was a mere obstacle, a final challenge before the ultimate triumph of darkness. The final battle was about to begin, a confrontation with the unknown that would determine the fate of both the house and its captive. The air grew still, a heavy silence that preceded the storm. The house held its breath, anticipating the climax of its reign of terror. The end was near. Chapter 15. The Endless Night. The world erupted in chaos. The house, once a silent observer, became a tempestuous entity, its foundations shaking with a primal rage. Walls crumbled, ceilings collapsed, and the once familiar rooms transformed into a labyrinth of shadows and debris. The air was filled with the sound of destruction, a cacophony of crashing timbers and shattering glass. The captive was thrown into the maelstrom, a helpless victim in the face of overwhelming force. The body was battered and bruised, the mind a whirlwind of terror and confusion. The sense of time dissolved, replaced by a timeless expanse of chaos. The house seemed to be alive, its rage a tangible force. It struck out with an inhuman fury, its goal the complete annihilation of all within its walls. The captive was a mere obstacle, a speck of defiance in a world consumed by destruction. The haunting melody from the forbidden room echoed through the chaos, a mournful dirge amidst the cacophony. The child's laughter, once filled with innocence, now carried a chilling undertone of triumph. The house was dying, and with it, the spirits that haunted its halls. The ground shook with each new wave of destruction, the house collapsing in on itself, a final act of defiance. The captive was buried alive, trapped in a tomb of rubble and despair. The darkness was complete, a void without end. The mind, battered and bruised, fought to cling to consciousness, but the body was weak, succumbing to the overwhelming force of the collapse. The world faded to black, a descent into an endless night. The house was silent, its reign of terror finally over. Yet, in the heart of the ruins, a flicker of life remained, a testament to the indomitable spirit of humanity. The battle was not over, merely paused. The captive was buried, but not defeated. In the depths of the rubble, a new story was about to begin, a story of survival, hope, and the enduring power of the human spirit.